Professor Barnes. Today I'm going to be analyzing the quote on page 17 by E.B. White, chapter 1. So it states, "There are no rules of writing. Who could possibly invent them? There are only guidelines, and the guidelines can and should be chucked out the window whenever they get in your way or your hair. I have never paid the slightest attention to the elements of style when I was busy writing. If the book inhibits you or constrains you, you should build a fire and throw the book into the flames." Something I observed was that E.B. White was a very successful writer, yet he never followed the guidelines that writers are supposed to follow. In fact, he never even basically looked at them, which I think is really unique, because a lot of people are scared that when they write something that isn't in the guidelines, it'll fail to become successful. I also noticed that he encourages writers to throw out the guidelines if they only get in your head and do nothing to improve your writing, because everyone writes different, and some people might be helped by the guidelines being there, and other people it would only cause them to be held back and not be able to write freely. I feel like this is really significant to note because it shows writers that you can be successful without following the rules sometimes, which I think is very important to understand, because I'm sure E.B. White was not the only writer throughout history that didn't follow the guidelines, and people still become successful. The passage implies that writers should step outside of regulations and write without fear of failing. The passage is assuming that writers allow guidelines to constrain them from what they really want to say, and in some cases this is true, and probably most cases, honestly, with probably sci-fi books and stuff like that, because those mystery books, you kind of gotta step out of the comfort zone and go somewhere else than in the real world, if you will. Rhetorically, the passage is trying to persuade new writers to write this way. I found it really interesting when he says, "in your way or in your hair," because this is obviously saying to not let the guidelines get in your head, because your hair is on your head. So I thought that was a really cool way to say that, instead of just saying let it get in your head, because obviously readers are going to pick up that's what he meant. I feel this passage fails to acknowledge the audience, also known as the people reading what you write, because if you're being graded on what you wrote, it would be based off of your teacher's guidelines, and if you fail to meet those requirements, you'll get a bad grade. So I think this is really important, and the fact that he didn't acknowledge it was kind of displeasing, I guess, because not all the time you can control whether you follow the guidelines or not. I believe this passage relates perfectly with the work as a whole. The whole work is focused on the things that you need to change as you move from college to high school, and this passage fits with that because it goes along with the idea of breaking from the 5-paragraph system that we're so used to. And by E.B. White explaining that not everything has to be so strict and on the guidelines all the time is basically that, because writing a 5-paragraph essay, there's a formula to each step, and going against those guidelines once you get into college, you don't follow that 5-paragraph essay format. So you gotta really learn how to free write and get your point across that way, instead of bulleting it in a 5-paragraph essay. This passage relates to our world today because throughout our educational career up until college, we are taught to write a certain way. This makes the transition to college writing so much harder because we no longer use the 5-paragraph system. And this is very true because personally, I find it hard knowing how to write like the 5-paragraph system all this time, that since we like learned to write essays, and then just switching over to like just writing like from your mind and like just freely, because I think it allows more creativity, definitely, and I agree with it so much. But I do think the transition is definitely harder instead of like, not learning the 5-paragraph system and just learning to write in school like how you would in college. Especially, they should be teaching that in high school. This passage helps us think differently about the function of writing because it allows us to express what we want to say without the fear of conflicting with guidelines. So that's basically it.